sit around and look at each other for another minute.
Just had a rough time.
What we'll do is we'll call to order this work session of the Planning Commission, and we'll go through order and roll call.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'll begin with Jeff Watson.
Here.
Lee Brown.
Here.
Ellen Carrick. Here. Vicki Good. Here. Ken Hartsfield.
Here.
Jerry Penland.
Here.
Peter Scanlon.
Here.
Charles Schrader.
Here.
And John DeVoe.
Here. You join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Housekeeping, you got the minutes of 27th, any changes, corrections, or anything else you want to do from this last meeting? If not, move to approve. Second.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing. I think it would be Riley's turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we will get our PowerPoint going here. For a brief overview of the discussion, the topic for tonight's work session is a recommended amendment to Chapter 18.31. This is a legislative activity for the Commission. This is modifying the zoning regulations, the law as it exists today. And this overlay district for Woodland Station was established in 2007, and I will go through the ordinance, the draft ordinance, step by step. But first, as far as tonight's work session, we'll have the staff presentation. Then the Planning Commission can ask questions and discussion. Then we will open it up for comments from the general public for their input. Then the Planning Commission will have deliberations. So you should discuss the pros and cons of the topic tonight and discuss it in such a way that you state your opinion and try to influence others about those opinions that you have. Because at the end of this discussion, we hope that there will be some direction with the majority of the opinions giving staff guidance. And you should know that this has been directed to the Planning Commission from the City Council. It is the City Council's desire to try to streamline the process for the Woodland Station overlay, which is a fairly unique zoning. And so the council is very interested in your robust review and opinions as far as how to improve the process associated with design review and development of the Woodland Station property. So at the very end, we will decide if a second work session is needed or whether you would like to move this forward to a public hearing if there is consensus on the majority opinion. So this is the role of the Planning Commission. Whenever there is a modification or change to the zoning regulations, Title 18, you are the ones who first vet that process or those laws, and you hold a public hearing. What we have learned recently is that it is so important to have a good debate and deliberation on proposed changes so that when we go to the public hearing portion, you have a full understanding and can make mindful decisions and recommendations to the City Council. So that's where we're going to start, and I just want to begin by showing you where the overlay district applies. It was originally established in 2007, and it applies to the 10 acres plus a small portion of Bergstrom Park, the parking lot area. And it is outlined in red. This was the 10 acres that was acquired from the Saddle Club. And because the DDA, which was established in 2001, and the acquisition took place a couple of years later, and the development vision for this property was very unique. It was a village type, high density, lots of commercial, the World Theater, recreation facilities, commercial, all types of retail, as well as some housing or residential in a mixed-use setting. So in order to allow for that vision, which I term the pie-in-the-sky plan, it needed a special zoning similar to a PUD. So planned unit development provides for flexibility in setbacks and heights, and would allow for that vision to be implemented. Fast forward to 2019, the only development that has occurred is Woodland Hardware, which is great, but the rest of the property, as you see, is undeveloped. So the City Council was interested in trying to streamline this process and also provide for residential on the ground floor, because as we started looking at how to develop this property, it may make more sense to have townhomes or apartment complex on the southern side of the property. Not to say that that's exactly what will happen. It is the DDA's decision as to how they proceed with development based on what comes forward from investors. So that's a little history of why the overlay was put in place and its purpose.
Sally, before you go on to the next slide, can you just cover the AmeriGas property? Last slide.
The AmeriGas property used to have the tanks, and that property was acquired by a group of investors and they did have an agreement with the DDA that should they remove these tanks and acquire this property, that they could move forward with developing this front portion of Woodland Station that we refer to as Lot 2. So that's the AmeriGas property is still held by the group of investors.
Is it within the overlay? My impression was the overlay district property. It's not.
It is not. When they were moving forward with their development, they did ask to be part of the overlay, and then when things fell through for them, they asked to be removed. So thanks for that. Any other questions about the map? Okay, so let's step through the proposed ordinance 1348. The beginning of every ordinance is always the recitals or the whereases, and the purpose of the whereases is to establish the reason why the amendment is important and the justification. So as I've underlined in red kind of the highlights for the purpose of this amendment, which is the additional flexibility and the potential for removing obstacles to development or barriers to development, and also providing for that housing on the ground floor, which could potentially provide for a greater diversity of different types of housing, rather than having condominiums on the upper level of a mixed-use commercial on the ground floor, apartments or condominiums on the top floor. Right now, there is a prohibition on having residential on the ground floor. And let's see, it also is to support greater diversity in the downtown area. So these whereases are setting the stage for the amendment. And this amendment is adjusting two very small, or two, fairly small areas of the overall purpose of this. We get into the purpose of the overlay district, and it is to allow for flexibility when applying the central business district zone. The underlying zone is still there, the central business district. So all the uses within the central business district still apply to this property. However, what's unique about this is that it allows for those uses to all be permitted uses versus a conditional use. Residential in the central business district is a conditional use, which would have to go through public hearing process. A drive-through window, for example, if somebody put in a coffee shop and had a drive-through, that's a conditional use. But with the overlay, it allows for a permitted use. So it does not go through the public hearing with the Planning Commission and City Council like a conditional use does. It's permitted, it's reviewed by, based on the findings of the staff, reviewing the standards and the guidelines. It's a use by right, in other words. So that allows, and it also allows for flexibility in terms of scale, mass, architectural design, and overall site design. So the applicant proposes their heights, their setbacks, their mass, very similar to a PUD. The only change in the purpose is to make it broader so that the overlay is a benefit for the entire community, not just for this specific area. So that's why the critical area, this critical area was changed to the community. And wherever there are any changes, I've underlined that in green. The red underlines are basically the subject or the important aspect. So the intent of the Woodland Station Overlay District was to guide the architectural and site planning process. And we think that by removing the Site Plan Review Committee, we can remove that little phrase and add encourage development. That is the whole reason for this amendment, is to encourage the development of this property. And again, change it to community so that it benefits the entire community, not just this particular location. And it's very important to understand that after the overlay was put in place, then the DDA worked on design guidelines for this property. And those design guidelines were adopted by resolution. They weren't put into the code, but they were adopted to provide guidance to create that village and that unique environment. And you all received a copy of that Resolution 677. It got very detailed to even the type of roof. Roofs could not be flat. They had to have a peak. There had to be a certain type of material. Could not be asphalt shingles. It had to be either metal, standing metal, or tile. It was that kind of thing for those design guidelines. We are not proposing to remove the design guidelines. What is being proposed is the removal of the design committee, review committee. So I'll get to that very quickly here. This is the section of applicability and permitted use, so it applies to any development within that 10 acres. The permitted uses, I've explained, instead of any conditional uses, all the uses in the Central Business District are now considered permitted. And there were a few other uses, farmers markets, amusement, recreation, entertainment activities that were not even included in the Central Business District, so those were added in there. And this is the section that talks about the residential dwelling units, in that they were required to be above the ground level. So the change in the wording is that if they are residential units, they are to be attached and consisting of 5 or more attached units in mixed-use buildings on any floor. So that's the change in the residential. Here are the standards within the Woodland Station. And Section A, it talks about kind of the high-level aspiration of these standards to be in harmony with our mountain character, our historic environment, meeting the intent and purpose of this chapter. And then Section B talks about the typical zoning standards shall be proposed by the applicant. So here again, this is where that flexibility comes in, and that it be reviewed by the permitted use, site plan review, procedures for administrative review. And those are all outlined in the sections of 1834.053 and 1834.058. Very similar, a recent permitted use that started here recently is the Natural Grocers project. So that was, you didn't see it, it was a use by right in that community commercial zone, and that process does allow for public input. And I'm going to review the standard steps of a permitted use by right. So you'll see that it's a very transparent, very open process, although it is handled administratively. Here's the other major change or amendment, which is the building and improvement designs must be submitted to the DDA Design Review Committee for approval prior to construction. After the Design Review Committee has approved the building, then the applicant submits to the city for administrative review. So this paragraph, the City Council believes it would be better to eliminate the requirement for Design Review Committee of the DDA to review this package prior to the submittal to the staff or the city. And I'm going to show you the standard procedure so you can see how that fits or doesn't fit into the process, and how it makes an applicant or a developer go through an added step, which also creates uncertainty for them, because now they have to have review by a committee that is not technically used to doing these types of reviews prior to the staff, the professional staff, looking at the application and the design. So another section to this code deals all with signage, and that is codified because in the zoning regulations there's a whole nother chapter dealing with signage for the entire community. But for Woodland Station, they felt like there needed to be some special criteria for signage. And I'm not going to go through these, but wherever it said that the Design Review Committee was going to approve or review signage, that too has been struck from the code. The planning staff reviews signs every day, and so we are used to looking and applying these standards to whatever signage in the commercial district is being applied for. And this is a whole nother, the rest of the sign code, and this sign code was updated maybe about 4 years ago, because it was extremely restrictive at first. An example of that is that they could have only half the wall signs as we have in our standard regulations. This changed that so that the wall signs could be the same size as the rest of the commercial development in the town. And then, so that's the end of the sign section. Now, again, these amendments only propose 2 changes in general. The first is to remove the prohibition of the residential units on the ground floor, so to allow for residential units on the ground floor, and then remove the process associated with the Design Review Committee. And I wanted to just quickly summarize a standard typical use by right process is that we first begin with pre-application meetings. And sometimes that's many meetings with a investor or a developer, just to help them start formulating their concept and ensuring that it does meet the standards before they begin to spend a lot of money on site plans, landscape plans, engineering, those sorts of things. So this pre-application process is very important, and we provide what we call SMART meetings that bring in the fire district, the city engineer, the planners, the building department, any of the experts that would be reviewing these plans ultimately for the construction. So the pre-application meetings are vetting this project so that they can begin to develop a concept plan. Then that concept plan, we have something in writing or a sheet and a design that we, the staff and some of the fire district and others can take a look at and provide initial comments, so that if there are any red flags with this proposal, we identify those early in the process before they have spent an application fee and the money to be able to have a complete site plan submittal. So then, once the concept plan, and we've provided general comments, then there is a formal development application. And our checklist is 3 pages long, at least, And it goes from, have you planned for snow storage, to trash removal, the design of your dumpster enclosures. It's very detailed. And so to get to step number 3, that's a big investment by a developer. And then once we receive that application and determine that it is complete, then we do a public notice, and there is a 15-day comment period that anyone in the community, it's posted, letters are sent to the surrounding property owners, and we also have now started listing them on our website if they come in, and the notice is available for anybody to take a look. And then the staff routes this application to all of our referral agencies, and we begin to prepare our comments. Sometimes we are unable to approve or deny it, so we will write what's called a review letter. And that will give the applicant a chance to upgrade their application, their plans, and resubmit a second round of plans that have addressed their deficiencies or areas of concern. But after that, there may be 1 or 2 iterations. We certainly want to get to a agreement and a success point. Then the staff prepares a certified letter of approval or denial. I mean, if this isn't going to work at all because it missed a major important aspect of the standards, then it gets denied. If it does get denied, the applicant has a chance to bring it forward to City Council and decide. The City Council has an opportunity to say whether it meets the standards or not. So it's a very fair process for the applicant and the community. After the approval, then there is, the developer prepares their construction drawings for both the site, the utilities, and the building itself. And a building permit is then issued and they're underway. So a development process, this is fairly simplified in these 7 steps, but it is oftentimes a back and forth kind of scenario in order to get it right. Now, right now, the way this overlay process is outlined, there's still pre-application meetings. There can be a concept plan because smart developers know that if they can get good feedback up front before they have a formal application, then they know they're on the path to success. So these 2 first stages are very important to begin vetting that proposal. But the way this section 1831 is written right now is that then the building and improvement design must be submitted to the DDA for design review. So the DDA Design Review Committee becomes a first layer of review before the formal application is submitted to the city for the city's review. And the DDA's Design Review Committee then would provide comments, meet with the developer, and they will get to a point where there is agreement and the DDA Design Review issues a letter of improvement based upon approval based upon their findings. Then the developer submits their formal application to the city, and our standard process for a use by right goes through the notice and the comments and the revisions as needed to get to construction. So you can see in red that this is an added step, which is usually a more streamlined process. Now, if the overlay stays in place, and there is no design review committee. I wanted to make sure that you understood that the DDA still has a great deal of control and involvement with what happens to the property and to the development. So at the pre-application meetings that the staff has, the DDA is also holding meetings to discuss the uses and the design and their terms of conveyance. So they are beginning to formulate what's called a disposition development agreement or a TIF agreement. So the DDA board is working very closely with this developer already in order to create a very comprehensive and tight agreement, because the developer is purchasing or obtaining land that they are obligated to develop and put into economic development service as a benefit to our community. So while we're working with the developer on the concept plan, the DDA continues to refine their terms of their disposition or their TIF agreement and their development agreement. So the DDA is very much involved with the developer directly, while the staff is also working with the developer to ensure that they're meeting the standards, the design guidelines as currently laid out in the overlay district and in those guidelines. When a formal application comes in and is submitted, we route it to our referral agencies, and we will route it to the DDA so that the developer is having their plans reviewed concurrently by the DDA and by the city. The public notice process begins, and the DDA can provide further comments at that time. The staff then will write a certified letter of approval, and the DDA and then the developer begins to prepare their construction drawings. And know, if you ever want to look at any of these agreements, they are multiple pages, 15 pages of very strict expectations and deadlines of what that developer needs to accomplish in order to affect a development within Woodland Station. So I hope that that was clear to you in terms of the difference with a design review committee or no design review committee, and that the DDA is still very much engaged in the type of development that is going to occur on the property. It is the entire board.
If you were back to the prior slide, I'm sorry, are you? If the staff denied the development application in the non-overlay district, the applicant has the ability to appeal to the city council. Yes? They
still do in the overlay.
So would the overlay appeal go to the city council, or would it go to the DDA board?
It would go to the city council.
Okay, thank you.
One question that I have is, what projects have been done over the last 5 years where they had to use the design committee? Was it the copy and the...
Most recently, the design committee looked at the EV station, the charging station for electric charging station. They looked at signs that Woodland Hardware was going to install. Prior to that, it was the Weatherford and Unruh project on Lot 2, and prior to that, it would have been the Woodland Hardware project.
What about the car wash, coffee kiosk?
It's not in Woodland Station. Only applies to this 10 acres.
Okay. And how much is owed on that particular piece of property?
I don't know that that's a relevant question. They're talking about zoning,
And
not
taxpayers'
debt.
property, the DDA. I'm just asking.
That would be a good question for the DDA board.
I have a question about occupancy rates for retail on ground level buildings that are mixed use with retail and residential above. Do you know that answer?
An occupancy for, according to the building code, for a commercial property varies depending upon the use. So if you have a restaurant, it's and it's a large restaurant, and Ken will correct me, it's an assembly occupancy, an A. If you have a retail, it's usually a B occupancy for business. And then if you have residential above, then it's an R2? R2. So the building code is what drives the occupancies.
I was just looking at what was driving the reason for putting residences on the ground floor instead of just retail. Of course, retail would bring more property taxes to the BDA, and so I wondered about that.
You know, I think that what the goal is here is to encourage development. I actually had a recent meeting with Mr. Coy and Mary Jo Larson, Ms. Larson, with a gentleman who is looking for residential development. And when we told him that right now Woodland Station does not allow for an apartment building with apartments on the ground floor, that was something he was not interested in. So again, it's about providing as many options as possible, and certainly it is not desirable for this entire property to be residential, but there may be a corner that it makes sense to have townhomes or apartment that has ground floor residential. And this change was actually discussed very heavily with the Unruh and Weatherford project, because Unruh did have an apartment proposed in his first building on the ground floor, and it was in violation of this code. So in order to approve that project, the code needed to be changed.
Yeah, just,
Say that
go ahead.
someone on your little condominiums there, they would have to have something else in the ground floor?
Right, the condominiums would have to be on the second floor or above, as it stands right now.
Now, I've got a question. It's been rumored for a long time, or wasn't the land contaminated? That's why we could not have housing on the first floor.
There is not a rumor associated with that. There has been a full environmental assessment done on this property. There are a benzene plume under the property. Be happy to share that environmental assessment with you. It does not preclude having residential on the ground floor. What it does do is it stipulates a barrier from the ground into the building, and the opportunity to maybe vent that as an active system. Woodland Hardware put in a passive system with the potential of having an active venting system. So it's a very easy mitigation to deal with the benzene plume. So it's not a rumor, but it is not true that it precludes ground floor residential. What precludes the ground floor residential is the zoning regulation right now.
If I may interject, what took place back at that point, because I was on that, when the benzene was discovered on the original soil testing in the area, Matrix Design hired a company, I believe it was Matrix, out
Yes.
of Denver, to mitigate and fix that. And the state is involved with that, and once they got done doing what they were doing, we got from the state no further action necessary. And that was the big thing that we had to get. Cost $60,000 to do that, by the way. But when they got to that point that they did that, there are some stipulations. If you do a basement, you got to ventilate if you got workers down there on the initial building. But there's no further action required, and it wouldn't it'd be no problem putting anything.
Right.
Just a quick follow-up question to Ellen's question on the change to allowing residency on the first floor. It's not theoretically impossible then, if this ordinance passed, since residential development is a permitted use, that in the entire Woodland Station could be developed for residential use.
It's not theoretically impossible, but again, it is the DDA who determines who the land is going to be conveyed to.
Okay.
And they would probably frown upon the whole property being residential.
Okay. So the DDA still has a significant degree of control in terms of to whom they would ultimately decide to convey parcels of land.
And what that use will be and how it is designed.
Okay, thank you.
So I've got a related question that may have already been answered, but does the DDA have veto power on what can go in there?
They own the property. They don't have to convey it.
Okay, so the city council can't change their decision of something not going in there. If they decide not to put an apartment complex in there, for example, they say no, even though it's permitted use. If the DDA says no, can anybody in the city change that decision?
No. The city council has a disposition development agreement with the DDA. There is some oversight associated with that.
Does oversight mean
Maybe
changes?
it doesn't affect the change of the committee. So,
Yeah, I just I would answer that the city council still has final approval on the sale of the property, but they're gonna take that doesn't go away even if the design committee were to go away. They've got to make that decision anyways. That's the city council. Their job is oversight of DDA, and they conveyed the property to DDA for them to develop the property. So their intent is to see that property developed. So.
But just to follow through on the question, just so maybe other members of the committee are unclear, if the DDA said no, for whatever reasons, it's not me. If the DDA said no, entire new procedure, could the city council overrule that decision and allow it? That's the question.
would hesitate to say that the city council would. You're saying if a developer proposed a development of the property in city, you're saying would the city council deny that development?
No.
Or the opposite. So.
The question is really what power does the DDA board retain if the design review committee, if this ordinance was adopted and the design review committee gets eliminated?
I don't think really much changes other than now the entire DDA now has input in the administrative review process now. So it's the entire board that has that input process. But you're probably right in that. But that doesn't change whether the design committee goes away. That's the same authority that the city council has all the time. In that they have final approval of the DDA's budget. They have the final approval of the sale of Woodland Station. So all those are city council's authorities. So I don't know if that changes anything if the design review committee is removed. It doesn't have an impact on that.
Okay, fair enough. I don't want to debate that.
With the DDA owning the land, they own it.
Correct.
I can't understand how the city would force them to sell it.
We just want. I mean, I say me. The city council
I
wants to see it developed. That's just like with it's the DDA's.
Property rights, how the city council force them to change their mind and sell the person the property. I don't think that's the question.
Well, it's a public process, right? And so what I will just say is if the community sees it as a fantastic development and DDA decides not to move forward with it, that's on them. If the city council does the same thing, DDA brings one to city council, that's on them too. I think the intent is that if a fantastic development comes to the DDA and city council and it's not approved, that's political pressure, I would say, that on all those governing bodies to get that done. So,
thank you.
At the last DDA meeting, I happened to go to it. There are 2 possible contracts coming in on that property. I'm not sure why we're making any changes
well, it's not already sold, but I think I don't want to speak for our attorney because he's not here tonight, but he would be here during the hearing, is that his thought is that anything dealing with this ordinance could be delayed. It could be delayed and not implemented until after. Delayed and not implemented until after those two days. Any applications that we put in after the ordinance, that would be, if you want to talk about that, Sally, looks like you can do.
No.
Thank you. You use the word con. These are ideas, and we haven't even seen the ideas yet. These are speculators who said that we want to be able to, the speculator, the investor, is interested in sharing their ideas with the DDA to see if it is something that is appropriate for that particular site. So there is no contract. I look for ways in which we try to expedite, facilitate a process that has a great deal of certainty to it. So if you've ever been a developer, there's a great deal of hoops to jump through, and the fewer hoops they have and the more certainty they have, the easier it is for them to create a good plan. And yeah, there has been, people walked away from developing on this property because of an onerous process.
And again, I don't have a problem with seeing vacant land in a town or a city. Vacant land is good to me in some cases. So having it vacant for 3 more years instead of 1 more year, that's not an issue with me at all. Another thing is the ground floor residence. I've seen all over the world places where businesses on the ground floor are great with residences above. It's all over Europe, all over Japan, Korea, all over. And that works out great. I don't know why we want to change that.
Does this change that?
Yes.
It certainly does.
You can't have a business with residents
Oh,
above?
no, you can still do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It gives them the option to have residential on the ground floor, if it's appropriate. We're not saying that it will be developed with all residential.
So it's not an either-or kind of...
Under the current design standards, let's say if a design, a completely commercial development were to look at lot 2, the top one, were to build out there, and there would be also an accompanying design for residential on the south side of that, it could not be done. And so right now there's just not flexibility. And I will tell you, I have been approached. This is not me. As a city manager, I do get approached on potential development in the city, and I've been approached when I was the manager down in Pueblo West that that developers do want flexibility, and I've seen it where. There's a lot of flexibility that's already in this in the design standards. It's great. It has a lot of permitted uses, but as we've heard from different developers and from the historical aspect of the way that design standards have been used, that there have been some obstacles, and so we're just not say me speaking for City Council that they're just trying to streamline the process because. Right now, it's a little bit onerous, and that they want to take what we see as a redundant step, where DDA would still have input in the process, and ultimately would make the recommendation for the property to be conveyed to a developer is still there. All that is still there. That is what has been conveyed to city staff, and the reason why this ordinance was drafted for consideration in the first place.
Can I ask, clarify? The city planning staff's reviews tends to be a technical review. You meet necessary, just technical requirements. You gave, is there enough space for snow removal? Is an example of what you gave. When the design committee reviews it, would it be the case that their review is in fact a little bit broader,
No.
in fact, looking for the best interest of the city, or is it your understanding they are only permitted in that role to take on the technical kind of review?
Did you review the design, did you read the design guidelines?
I did.
Some things in those design guidelines are very specific, like I mentioned. Others are very squishy and could be interpreted many different ways. So the subjectivity does come into play. And for the most part, the staff, when we professionally review, of course, we want to ensure that we have dotted the I's, crossed the T's, and made sure that our findings will stand up in court.
You know what? I hear in your comment actually an agreement with me that in fact that the design committee may be more of a, you use maybe subjective term, but evaluative, qualitative in ways that differs from what the city planning staff would do. So I mean, there is a different sort of, I mean, at least it seems to me that
There is.
There's a different sort of review that's going on there.
But again, the DDA will have input on that design, and if they feel that some of those guidelines should be waived, as they were with Woodland Hardware, then the staff is not going to go contrary to what the board wants to do.
In this general regard, I note that there's language related to conditional use authority generally, which says that aside from all the other standards, it must be decided to be in the best interest of the city. Is there similar language here? I didn't see it relating to this.
Read the site plan review guidelines.
Do you think
It's
that's
in there.
sufficient to get in there?
It is.
By the way, and this may be more for sort of later on in the work session, it's much more technical things, but some discussions we've had in connection with another project going on in the city right now gives me great cause for adding language that attached residential dwelling units consist of 5 more attached units are okay if it's somehow part of a mixed-use development. I think some discussions we've had, I mean, I'll take an extreme example. If your roofing fits the right character for an overlay district, you put 3 apartment buildings that are connected with kind of a deck or carport with a good roof that has a little bodega in it. That's a mixed-use building with the attached units on it because it's a deck attached to or something else.
So-
As written, this would need a whole lot of thinking on what you meant
And
by attached units.
that's a great comment. So we could tweak it to say common walls by common walls. I mean, that would take,
Structural
Yep.
commonality. and all
but that's a great comment. But it is specific to say attached because this is central business district. This is not a multifamily zone that is usually a buffer between commercial and single-family residential. This is a downtown core part of the,
What this anticipates about, which could well be a series of apartment buildings with an occasional connected, slightly
Yeah.
connected here and there, little convenience store, something or other, gift shop.
so
something
it could
else.
be easily
Laundromat,
fixed
something.
with a couple of words, like common walls.
I have a question.
Sure.
Oh, you have another one? Oh, you keep going?
No.
Jerry had his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, when were the design guidelines published?
They were created in 2007.
Yeah, I see it, 2007.
Shortly after the overlay district was adopted.
So,
Jerry, let me bring you up to date on that. I was on that design committee. So was Mary Jo. So was Steve Randolph. I believe Chuck Severance is, but there was a developer on it. Understand the concept of the World Theater Village. That was still when the Sturmans were still involved with that. And we put that thing together. I mean, it got so detailed. It was what colors the doorknob. And that's one thing that the DDA needs to go over, because some of those I don't think are appropriate to what works now. It's just,
I'm sorry, that was my point all along.
Yeah.
Is that maybe what's needed is the design guidelines need to be looked at again and simplified.
and that would be something for the DDA to do.
That's a separate resolution, as Sally said, if they wanted
But
to
you're
modify
correct,
that.
because it was based on a village concept that once Sturman's got into the situation they did, that was no longer feasible.
That's directly related to what we're talking about here. Do we eliminate the design review committee, or do we just simply revise their guidance? I think that's
No.
directly related.
They're permitted variances and adjustments by the design guidelines. So
There are.
they have that.
So, but we're not proposing to eliminate the guidelines.
Okay?
It's just the process of eliminating an extra step by a review committee who is not trained, experienced in this type of negotiation.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. If the design review committee is eliminated, would members of the DDA board be invited to pre-application meetings or any of these SMART meetings or any of that type of thing?
They could certainly
could
be
attend.
part of those meetings, absolutely. If there are, as you know,
More
if there
than
are more
two.
than two, then we would post them and advertise them as public meetings.
Are there any incentives for the person buying this said property whenever they buy the Woodland Station area? Is it possibly, I mean, what are their incentives? Are there incentives given in lieu of?
It's called TIF.
TIF, okay. And
Because the city can't give
What's the
incentives.
purchase price of
Correct.
land here?
could be
Purchase price.
$0.
The purchase price is based on a fair value.
Zero, correct? Cash price.
It could be.
The consideration is to be presumably fair market value. The cash price is zero.
Not necessarily. It can be sold for cash price as long as it meets the IRS requirements.
We're getting off subject.
Well, I think
We
if
are.
you had a design review that is a requirement to get something maybe for 10 cents on the dollar or free, I mean, that's not too bad of a speculation to have. I mean, to be able to meet that is not that unrealistic.
Well, if I
Saying, I
can,
want a blue roof with brick on the front, if that's what the design committee, after other things have been being built, say, this is what, is going to be a requirement for the area. If you're getting something for 10 cents on the dollar, why shouldn't it have some speculation and some requirements with it?
just don't go away. I'll just say that instead of having two people review that, you have the entire board, let's say, review and provide input in the administrative review process. So it's really more of a holistic approach to I think, the development review process.
Aren't we adding more government to this whole process?
Well-
Because the DDA is not a government entity.
They are actually. They're an appendage of the city council. So they are a quasi-municipal organization, just like the city. So they are a government entity. And the city council has jurisdiction for oversight over the DDA. They, like I said before, they approve their budget. They would ultimately approve the sale of this land. And the disposition and development agreement, which is currently in negotiation, dictates how that would be done. I don't know if that answers your question. I probably won't.
Mr. Chair, we can move to comments from the public when you're ready.
Ken had his hand up.
I do have a few questions. Just to clarify, so the DDA guidelines, architectural review guidelines, remain in place and they'll be administered by city staff under this proposal?
Yes.
Now, does this DDA have overlay guidelines for signage?
Yeah, the signage is part of the overlay.
So that would also be administered by staff?
Yes.
In its current consideration?
Yes.
Okay. We're calling the attached units 5 or more. I just didn't know what was magical about 5 versus 4 versus 6 versus 10.
That's a really good question. That's kind of what our city attorney put in there as a draft. So with the Planning Commission's deliberation, you may think that 2 or more, as long as it has a common wall,
Well, there's
is
no
fine.
basis on code or
No.
basis you could share with us. So
No.
right now, it's a fairly arbitrary number.
Yes.
They did, Ken?
The DDA review committee, does it have a public comment portion?
It does not.
So either the current process or the proposed process does not have a public meeting to review and have public comment on. Is that correct?
The current process with the design review would only have public comment after the application has been submitted to the city.
But is this public comment through correspondence with staff or meetings with staff, but no public
Yes.
hearings such as this?
It's
Or about the-
no public hearings.
And under permitted use, neither one of those would occur anyways. So,
But if this is akin to a planned unit development, which has been referred to, that would be a public comment process.
I only referred to that in terms of flexibility, giving the developer the opportunity to propose standards of height and setbacks, mass, those sorts of things. But you're right, Ken, a PUD does have a public hearing process.
So, well, public comment would be received by staff in the proposed or even the current process. Public meetings and commentary, public venue is not proposed or included.
Not through the administrative review. However, the DDA meetings are public, and if they're entertaining a development, you always have a forum with the DDA.
Thank you.
At this point, I don't know if we had anybody sign up. We don't have a sign-up sheet, so we'll do this by, who wants to talk? Who wants to, Mary Jo, you were the first one here. Name, rank, and serial number.
Mary Jo Larson, 200 West Midland Avenue. And I would like to say, as chairman of the DDA, that first of all, we're a very dedicated group. This is our community, the same as it is all your community, and we're very concerned in what goes on Woodland Station, because that's the last space left downtown. And we need to be very careful of how that is developed, because what our community seems to want is the village concept. We all like it. We all liked it from the very beginning. We've got 20-some development plans. They all the ones that consisted of the village concept were definitely welcomed on every avenue. It just couldn't pencil out. And that's what we're here trying to help a developer make that pencil out. Now the DDA, and I don't know if you are familiar with how the DDA and council works. We are separate from the council, but we are appointed by the council. The DDA was designed to have funds to be able to give incentives, to be able to help developers work through a development where the cities couldn't. They legally couldn't do that. But that's why we have to work together. We have to work together. It's not we should work, we want to work, we have to work together in order to make this all happen, and for the incentives and for the proper development. The DDA has, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've been saddled with a lawsuit that has held us back, but we have revisited our foundation plan. We have revisited our 2009 contract. We have revisited about every step. I didn't realize that the overlay district was in jeopardy, because we hadn't got to that yet, but that was on the list. So I guess I would like to ask planning to recommend to just give us a chance to hear our new developments that are going to be presented to us, to revisit the overlay and the signage, and to try to see how we can expedite this and make it easier. Like, don't take something away that we may need. Let's look at it and take away what we don't need and keep what we do. And I think that the DDA consists of some very reputable business people in this town. They've been through the city process of building, developing, trying to stay in business, the whole thing. We understand what those developers are going through. And I'd like you to trust that we are good enough business people. We have bought into Woodland Park financially, and we have been here long enough to have a feel for what may be a good thing in Woodland Station and not. And I want to say, we're not, right now we have a housing demand. More than anything, is housing. And I would like to say that we are not against that. And the lower part of Woodland Station would be a great housing project. It's lower, it's like 60 feet lower than the crest of the highway. It would be a great place to go up. It would cover the trailer park. It's down where housing could be. We're not against that. Right up by Bergstrom Park we don't feel where housing should be. Maybe some multi-use, but some retail and some coffee shops, some people things, the park. Get people out there, people walking around. Tie in the south side of Highway 24 to the north side of Highway 24 by business and development and that kind of thing, not just housing. And, I guess I'm just asking that you give the DDA a chance. Now that it's out of a lawsuit, and now that we've got some developers stepping up, give us a chance to see what we can do with that and make it happen, because we want it to. But we just seem to have one roadblock after another, and I guess I would just ask that you just, even if you table it, whatever you need to do is a suggestion, but give us a chance. And if you want to make the design committee, if that is a real concern, then make the whole board the design committee, not just two people. Make the whole board the design committee. We've already passed in our minutes that we work in conjunction with Sally every step of the way, so we don't have this going back and forth. We're going to do it together. We're going to do all of this together. And that's what we're asking, is just try to let us work through this together and not take away and reinvent what we've tried to do. We will address the overlay. We will address the design codes for now, just like we have all the rest of it. I know I have more to say, but I can't think of what it is, so thank you.
Thank you. Question?
Oh, questions?
Is this overlay, is this something that you're working to redo?
We will revisit it. I didn't realize that it was such a emergency issue, but yes, we need to revisit that. We need to revisit the design, just like we did the foundation plan, just like we did the contract for 2009, which was outdated, and we've come back to council in January with a suggestion of how it could expedite things that were put in there in 2009 that really don't apply now.
Do you actively pursue projects to fit in the little squares in here?
Yes. Yes, we definitely do. And we had, we have followed our foundation payment plan. We purchased, and there will be donations to cover our wagon and horses. That is an art piece. It's movable, whether it's developed or not, whether it stays there or not. It's all portable. We had our first wagon party. We're going to have another one scheduled. We're doing things on that property. We're bringing some energy to it. We're trying to clean it up. Let the people use it. It belongs to the community. It belongs to the people. Let's let them use it a little bit till some developer is ready for it. Let's get our downtown energy going. Let's get people down there. Let's get finances going. Let's bring new money to town. Let's do some things that will make a development work.
What's your position on the first floor, allowing the first floor?
I just don't think that's good. I think that, like you said, in other countries it works where housing is above retail. I would like to see it retail on the upper part. On the lower part, I don't think it's an issue. I think that would be fine because it would tie into the trailer park. It's kind of separated from the upper part. That lot 2 is the valuable piece. And that's where the retail, that's where the multi-use, that's where that should be. The lower part would be okay.
If you can't bring in residences because of the lower part, aren't you going contrary to your vision?
Talking about the lower part of the property.
She meant the lower part.
I mean the lower part of the property.
I'm talking about,
Yeah, not.
I'm talking about.
Well, at that point, we will revisit with council, and then, if we need to change whatever we're trying to do here, we can do this then.
Well, if I can, Mary Jo, you're here is because you're bringing up some good points that you, it seems like you do agree that on the lower lot, not lot 2 is where you prefer to have commercial, the lower lot, you do feel like there's an opportunity to put residential on the first floor, and the only way to do that is to put that provision, that change in the ordinance. So you do, to some degree, you do agree with that modification to the current plan, but only for the lower portion.
Later and lower. Now that, no, wait, let me speak for myself, because that is my idea. That has not been brought before the whole board. We did not vote on that, so that is my idea. With the housing on the lower part of the lot.
One thing I wanted to remind everybody, 2007, 2008 was a very bad recession. Took us about 8 years to get out of it, 7 years. Took us a little bit longer up here, it seems, to get out of that. And we as human beings are looking at that property saying, there's that huge piece of property and it hasn't been developed yet. It hasn't had any opportunity, folks. It hasn't had any opportunity. A recession that I remember when you could pick up a house here in Woodland Park for $60, $70 a square foot. Some of them, I saw a house for 13,500 square foot, and it went for less than $500,000. So we got to remember the recession was there. Keep that in mind, and that is part of why this hasn't been developed. It's not through any fault of the DDA. It was just an economic thing. And I'm wondering if changing all the rules now, going forward, we're just trying to make something go there instead of the right thing to go
And
there.
I feel that we are. And I think that, like you're saying, you say you agree to that, then let's do that. Well, we don't know what's going to be presented to us. Maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe there's enough housing down there and enough other development and retail that we don't want to change that. Now.
In
Let's
some of
see
those
what
years,
they
though,
say.
there were zero, hardly
Exactly.
any new permits pulled for water taps. There was nothing going through the planning department.
Yeah.
And so why would we think that this 7 acres, 6 acres that is left would be any different? It's just that the timing wasn't right. It was a terrible recession. Then we got involved in some type of lawsuit, and it has not really, it needs a for sale sign in front of it, and
And
go
we've
from
talked
there,
about
but
a
you don't
for sale.
change the rules when you never had an opportunity to play the game.
And that's what I'd ask, is that we don't change the rules yet. We can change them anytime. Let's don't change them yet. Let's see what's coming. Let's see give us a chance to rework this.
Mary Jo, this is not an emergency. Okay, stop.
Why do I feel like it is?
Because you do, but I don't. I don't care if we take 10 work sessions. I don't care if this lasts 3 months. We're going to get it right and work with the city and the DDA and planning to get this thing worked out. That's what we need to do. If we've got perceptions that need to be cleared up, we'll clear up the perceptions. But it's been 17 years since you and I got involved with this thing. Okay. And we tried to change it so the whole board would be the design review. And you could never get that passed because part of the board went against that. And that's one of the reasons we're here a little bit. Let's give some time to get this worked out. We're never going to get this and have a hearing at the next session. We're going to need another work session just on we got among ourselves and you folks haven't talked yet. So this is going to take a while to get it done right. It's not going to happen overnight. And what's the rush? There's no rush to do it right. We don't want to take on, and I know it's a control thing, we don't want to take that away from the DDA, but after 17 years, we got to figure out another way to start getting that property known and do something with it. And I think we all have to be on the same bandwagon to get that done. We can't have one faction against the city that doesn't like it, one faction against this. We have to work together, all of us that are citizens of this area, and get it done. And that's what I think we're going to try to get done. Next person. Jerry.
Jerry Good, 1005 Sun Valley Drive. Also a DDA board member and owner of Williams Log Cabin Furniture. There's a couple of things I'd like to kind of, first off, claiming that our design...
Put your mic up just a little bit, Jerry.
Claiming
Got to
that
hear
our...
the melodious voice of yours.
that our design committee is somewhat lacking in skills or talent, I think is a vastly misstated comment. If anybody sat and listened to Tanner describe things, I think you'll find otherwise. Another point I'd like to bring out is that residential in downtown Woodland Park is not the way it should be. That should be a commerce building. We should be residential. It's our job to bring the best value to the public. It's a public property that we're in charge of, and we should be building a commercial that enhances the downtown. And I'm all for that. But if we put in residential, it's taxed at 1/4 of what commercial is, and it's not a revenue for the city. It's just not good. Tanner, I'm sure he can explain that very eloquently. I'm just kind of a rule of thumb kind of guy, but. Then also, I'm not real sure the purpose of this removal of the overlay and design review committee, other than the fact that the people that we were in a lawsuit with are demanding that. I feel like we're still fighting this lawsuit. It's over. And don't perpetuate it. It needs to stop. We need support from the community. I'm tired of being the kicking boy. We've done nothing wrong. Support us. Give us an opportunity to do our job, and I promise you it'll get done good. It's a different environment there on the DDA board these days. So that's all I got to say.
If I can, I do want to apologize to the DDA the way that this ordinance came about. I mean, I think it's it was pulled. It was requested by city council, and the city staff put it together, knowing that this was one of the options. Over the last 2 months, 3 months, since our new city attorney was in place, he's provided a lot of different. He looked at what are all the options available to city council, and city council has a lot of authority. One of these is the authority to place one of these ordinances and try to streamline the process for development. And so, city council is not. I don't think they're kicking DDA, but I do think we could have done a better job, probably working with DDA on this ordinance, because it sounds like there's some common agreement on some of this, and I think that's why it's in front of you today. It's in front of you today to find out where those compromises can occur, and make recommendations to city council for those. So I think about the recommendation that the entire DDA be the design committee. I mean, there is challenges to that. I think about that, and that you have to hold a public meeting every time you meet with your developer. Whereas the current process, there's only two members of the DDA, and there's no need for that. With the staff, we don't need to either. There's no requirement for our staff to meet with the developer, and that's kind of where the streamlined process is. So by placing the entire DDA board as the design committee, you add an extra level of bureaucracy, I think, because now you have to publish the meeting and you have to coordinate that, whereas in advance. So I would weigh all those things in your considerations and recommendations to city council. But the reason why I'm up here is to say that I think, yes, we could have probably done a better job, and there's time. There's time to work with the DDA and try to try to come to some amicable resolution on this.
So may I just ask a qualifying question on your comments? Is it fair to say that there wasn't any conversation before this meeting between the city council, city staff, yourself, anybody, and the DDA board about the direction of this?
There was a work session probably about 30 days ago or so that was discussed with the majority of the DDA in the room.
Okay.
There was a discussion specifically about the ordinance, about an ordinance, not this specific ordinance, but an ordinance that would potentially remove the overlay. The city council was aware of it, and that's why they directed staff to draft this for the this process.
Yeah, you have to start.
So there was a discussion. What didn't come completely out of the blue, but there could have been more deliberation. Yes.
Thank you for your openness.
One of the things that we can do, because I know this takes place, just from the years I've been around this place, if we make the board have a public meeting, there has to be preliminary work done with the developer prior to that that's in confidence. I have heard that told me by every city planner, from Joe Napoleon or from Brian Flair on. The point is, some people want to come in and say, what about this, what about that? And they don't want the world known about it because they may not do it or they may do it or may cause the real estate prices to go up. There's a zillion different reasons why that happened. But that doesn't mean we can't work out a schedule, a priority, where we take some of that off from the city staff and we work with the DDA, and at the appropriate time, they have to get involved with that as well as a group. I think that stuff, it can be worked out. It's going to take us a while to work that out.
That's an excellent point. There's a reason why there's executive sessions that deal with negotiations for land sales and that type of, those authorities are there for the exact reason, so that you're not compromising your leverage in negotiations. And so, yes, you're absolutely right.
And just a qualifying question again, I ask a lot. The land, while some of us may love vacant land because it looks vacant, and we like to stare into Pikes Peak, and it's a beautiful view, Woodland Station doesn't exist to be vacant, and the DDA doesn't exist to hold vacant land. The city, the DDA wants and needs to develop this property. So some of this is trying to nudge that along to see what we can do to try to open up the opportunity for a developer that may not exist today, thus the first level, ground level residency. And the second is to bring to bear, without any judgment as to the past. I don't have the past. I have only lived here for 6 or 7 years, so I'm kind of a virgin from the past. But we have land that has not been developed. There's an economy where land in lots of communities is being developed like crazy. We want thoughtful development. What are the ways in which we can attempt to change things in a minor way, my editorial, that would possibly ignite something to happen here that hasn't happened before? Is that kind of the general backdrop from the city side on this?
I think the discussion, that's inaccurate. And I do want to make a comment that there's always lots of rumors and that this is being driven by some
specific project
or some other people. That's not the case.
Right.
The case is that the city council is trying to remove obstacles to development, and these are the options that they've conveyed to staff. They've noted these two particular modifications they feel would reduce those obstacles to development. Okay. Ultimately, the DDA has the final say in terms of with the developer and whether or not they present that final development plan to city council for sale, right?
Because they have the land conveyance power.
Correct.
And that is not being usurped in any way.
I'll tell you, City Council right now, the DDA is aware of this. We're in the middle of negotiating to change the disposition and development agreement where the City Council would like to give the DDA more time to develop this land. As it stands right now, the land would have to be reconveyed back to the city in 2 years, and so the city wants to see DDA be successful, and they want to see them develop this land successfully, and that's why they're in the middle of modifying that agreement that's favorable for both parties.
So there is a end date where this land could revert back to the city out of the DDA.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the city wants us to see it developed. That's what the City Council wants.
Thank you.
Any other questions for me?
One of the things that, on the disposition development agreement, I've done some background on that, and we're kind of getting off subject a little bit. But you started, that's okay.
Sorry. Sally will get me later.
When that agreement was made, I was on the DDA. So were you, Mayor Joe. I don't know if you were, Jan, or not at that time, 2007? Okay, but anyhow, there was never any mention in any of the meetings about not being able to sell the land because it became a bond for Vector Bank. I went back through CORE, and I saw who signed those agreements. There's no board member on there except the chairman. There's the people that attested to I've never heard of. That was never an agreement. So I think you need to get together and work that out. There was never any intent not to be able to have income off of it. Why wouldn't we do that? We're trying to pay the place off. So somebody has to figure out what's going on with Vector Bank and what's going on that we can't sell that property because there's a bond. Because that's what the paper reported.
Don't want to get too much off subject, but that is addressed in the new.
Okay, excellent. Now shut up about it.
Anything else from any other perspectives I can provide from City Council as much as I possibly can. Obviously, this was sent to you on a 4-3 vote so not the entire City Council was behind this, but they would like to hear your input on this ordinance, and it sounds like there's some opportunity for compromises here that both DDA and the city would be amenable to. And I also think that the discussion earlier in terms of, hey, why do this now? I think as I said earlier, and what our attorney has said, is that there's a potential for 2 applications to occur probably in the next 30 days or so, and that this can wait likely can wait till after those applications have been submitted, so it doesn't interfere or make changes or disrupt that process. And the City Council is aware of that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One. Of course you can. Pull the microphone down.
City Council did vote it down the first time, and then it was revisited at the same time until finally it was sent to you.
Hunted.
They showed much wisdom. I'm sorry. I've asked if anybody else wants to speak. Nobody else put their hands up. What I would like to see us do, if everybody's in agreement with it, we're needing to have another workshop. We've got things to work on. I want you to submit stuff to the staff about what you think changes should be, what would be a compromise, how can we work this out, and go forward with it. And you had a date of what? What was your next date?
August 11th.
For a work session, right? So we come back on August 11th. We'll talk about it some more. We'll get an update on what's going on with those 2 proposals that you had. We'll work out some of these differences that we got going on. And besides, we can't vote on anything tonight anyway. It's just a consensus to move on to another work session. Does anybody have, with our group here, an objection to that? We're probably not going to get
I don't have an objection, John. The only thing I would like to maybe do is have a consensus amongst ourselves that if we're going to delay a position on this to the next work session, that we attempt to agree tonight that if we're going to go to another work session, that we would come up with a consensus to bring it forth to the city council at that work session?
Yes or no, because if we run into other hitches, so we'll do another one. I don't care how long it takes, just so we get the thing done, so it's right, so everybody's in agreement, so we don't sit there and fuss at each other all the time, and we go forward to try to make this a better place to live for all of us. I have no problem with that.
Another thing too is what Mr. Brown brought up concerning the 5 units, and then you have the garage in between, and suddenly,
That's what they got to work on. They talked about that. That's a good
There
point.
might be other issues that we haven't.
Well, you give her a list.
What I'm just saying, generally, in the design guidelines, they're filled with design review committee, and they expressly give design review committee opportunity for opinion on aesthetic and other reasons. And I was alluding to that earlier. There's stuff that's in that. It's not just what the criteria are. It's how the criteria are looked at and reviewed. This anticipates the design committee doing so in a way that I'm not certain that the city staff would even want to take on as having a role. So that it's a qualitatively different review. And I don't think we can look at changing the ordinance without also looking at how those design guidelines work. So you need to read those design guidelines with the introduction and what the role of that committee is and how those all fit together.
We all have our homework to do. We all have our homework to do about this.
Sally, will you have a kind of a revised draft for the next work session?
We can certainly,
Some of the comments that you
yes,
put here.
look at a revised draft. And if you have other input, send that to us so we can integrate it.
And the public, please do the same thing. Do the same thing. And the DDA. We're not going to bite. You can talk to us. You can call up the staff. They won't bite back at you. That'll be okay to do that. Okay. We need to share that stuff among each other. And we need to all work together on this. Time to do it.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question of staff, just in general, something to consider? There's no conditional uses in this zone currently. In the overlay. Is it possible to make a first floor residence a conditional use?
It is.
Excellent.
So that would then go to a public hearing and be considered as a conditional use if that were a change.
That's a good suggestion.
It would help me in thinking about comments if I could get some sense from people, really the piece of them, what is this feeling like? Because the technical question, aside from the design review committee, is this residential? And if you allow an apartment building by itself, you can get a couple apartment buildings, then we'll be looking, what is our view on that? Is residential only if it's part of an integrated development, which really has mixed use, and it's not some kind of sham commercial? What are the sorts of things that people have in mind they're looking to? Or is it better to leave it as is, and we don't really want to touch that, and somebody can deal with the situation comes up? Because it's really hard to start writing language and suggesting things when you got no idea where anybody is.
Ken, that was an excellent idea. Excellent idea. That's a check and balance that you want to have.
No other sense of it. Is there a desire to change the residential provisions that it's currently upper floors only? Is that?
Not tonight. We can't vote on anything.
No, I'm just.
We just had the discussion, and I'll get my
Are we going to have,
view on
at
this
this point
too.
in time, we've asked, we're at that point during this meeting that we can simply say, do we have a consensus to go along and set that date for the whatever one she said, and sit there and do that, and let's have the next work session and start to get geared up for that. We need a consensus to do that. A majority consensus.
I think, John, what Mr. Brown is asking for is getting some more input. Do you like the idea of residential on the first floor? And Ken Hartsfield's comment was, let's send that through the public hearing process.
Yes.
So that's a great suggestion. Who else has suggestions? Or do you feel like Mr. Penland and not have it developed or encourage development at all? So it would be helpful to know where each of you feel on the current recommendation.
We'll start at this end.
I'm sorry.
I read through the original document, 2007, 2009. I found it very aspirational, but at the same time, I think there's a whole lot in there that I really, really like. I really like ground floor commercial. I like second floor residential when it's appropriate. And I hadn't even thought of perhaps residential on the lower part of that property. But I think the original document has some wonderful, wonderful things in it, and I would hate to give that up if we don't look at it carefully.
Peter?
On the current proposed ordinance, which we're going to continue to work on, I've actually been, I'm pretty supportive of it, since you're asking the opinion, without the benefit of 17 years of history, so maybe I'm a little naive, but I look at it and say, both entities, the DDA and the city, are interested in developing this parcel, and it hasn't happened. And, you know, if you're going to keep doing the same thing, there's no reason to expect a different result despite all best efforts. So the recommendation of having the city staff in effect be the primary but not exclusive planning approval group in this doesn't seem to me to be ultimately contrary, because the DDA ultimately has the authority to convey or not convey the property. So they still hold the major, if this is about who checks whom, about who likes what, the DDA has as much, if not more power remaining than the city planning staff would. And my experience with the city planning staff, though I'm not a developer, is that they're pretty thoughtful people and knowledgeable people, and they do this full time. I look at as a citizen, the vacant land, and as much as I like looking at Pikes Peak, if it's not developed, it's simply going to revert, it sounds like, back to the city at some point, and then the city will ultimately have to decide what to do with it. So it seems like this is a nice halfway measure to try to boost the potential development opportunity. I like Ken's notion of a conditional use since there seems to be some level of controversy on whether ground floor living quarters. I think that's a nice compromise. But overall, I don't see how the various parties are harmed in this once the history is set aside. It seems like it's more of a partnership going forward to try to get something done in the remaining time this land is with the DDA.
Jeff?
I like the idea of ground floor residential. I think if you don't do that, while you frustrate the vision, original vision, as I understand it, of the DDA. The DDA has a structure that says, you know, this part could be residential. You know, why frustrate that by not having ground floor residence? You could have upper floor residence over businesses elsewhere. And I've seen plenty of communities where, I think of Reston, Virginia, that, you know, where they integrate, you know, condominiums, commercial, all very nicely done, well planned, you know, extremely well planned, probably overly planned in that case. But it all works together. And to frustrate your vision by not allowing first floor residences seems to me wrong-headed. On the issue of, and I like Ken's idea there. I think that's a good answer for that. On the we showed the process, with the DDA integrated with your process. I don't know whether or not you meet with the same people all the time in each of those steps. But if there were more formalized relationship in the process, like liaison from the DDA to the city staff, that could go walk through this and be the communicator back to the DDA with these things. That seems to me like something that would help the replacement of the design committee and be a little more formal and a little more accountable. I don't know how it works now in terms of the relationship, but that's my suggestion.
Lee?
Yeah, on the question of changing now the condition of residential place, I guess I'm a little reluctant to, I'm not convinced it's a good idea generally. I can imagine just the people saying that maybe condos on one end and mixed use on the other may work out, but I think that will be part of integrated development, not set ourselves up to build the easy one that's not what we want. First up, the suggestion may be that may be a good way to get there with some particular standards to, in some narrowly circumscribed circumstances, maybe not conditional use, maybe too broad a term, but some circumscribed conditions under which, as part of an integrated development, one could allow some residential in the first place to get that facilitated. I have suggested, as far as the process, the review committee provides a somewhat different character of review than what the professional staff is. That said, professional staff does have the expertise. One of the things I would want to look at is in the guidelines themselves, if we're changing the process, we'll have to reflect it in the guidelines. The guidelines do say the design review committee has the variance potential. It may be that the entire board is the one to approve exceptions, and the staff is the one who actually does the technical review. Maybe that's a way to kind of balance out. There's no magic answer, but at least that's what I thought, to get the benefits being looked for, but still make it clear that the organization's set up to make the judgments about what's the right way to develop this property, what's the right additional value to get appropriate consideration of the property. They would be the ones controlling those variances. That's a thought, so thank you.
No. That's a good thought. I think that Ken's idea with that conditional use permit, when we are evaluating whether residential should be on the ground floor, case by case, I think that is a good idea. As we've all, said our opinions, and I like the idea of possibly having a DDA board member or two as a representative for the planning department meeting to come back and report to the DDA board as well. I think the design guidelines, possibly, they are very good, very in-depth. I think maybe they could be tightened up a bit, and that would be a job for the DDA.
Vicki.
I feel it needs to be left as it currently is with the current recession that we had starting in, 2007, 2008, and everything after that. With the debt that the DDA owes the city and on bonds, we need to make sure that the DDA is getting the maximum sales tax, the maximum property tax per square foot, so that they can generate money for the city, whatever gets put in there. And I've said this in many, many meetings, and I hope somebody starts believing me, but we're sitting on a gold mine. We are 15 minutes, we're in the mountains, 15 minutes away from 1 million people at the bottom of the hill. 15 minutes. And incredible how much most areas would kill to be in our position. Beautiful mountain town, friendly people, and we're sitting on a gold mine, and it needs to stay commercial.
Ken?
That's how we make
Oh,
money.
Sorry.
That's how we make money.
Ken?
Well, two issues seem to be on the table, and one is the review process for the project. And I don't have a major reservation about making the changes as proposed. The second issue is the housing on the first floor, and actually I'm opposed to it. I would like to see it stay as a commercial development with mixed use above, but as a compromise, I think that there are cases where if explained properly and justification is given, it may be justified, and that's why the conditional use or whatever proper term used allows for that first floor. As far as developing the southern portion, the bottom portion as full residential, I'd be opposed to that.
Jerry?
If you recall, what I said was that I don't know why we're rushing to streamline the process. And whether it stays vacant for 1 year or 3 years, doesn't matter to me. I never said I didn't want it to go. Just make that clear. The second thing is the signage. I don't have a problem at all with the city completely handling the signage. I don't know what the DDA thinks about the signage, but to me, that's a city function that should be consistent throughout the city. So we can, in my mind, I'll pull that apart totally, and I think that ought to be in city control. I think it's a business-focused area, and if you just drive through town, it's a business-focused area. So if we're going to make it a business area, let's make it a business area, and if we're going to have to put residents in there, put them above the businesses. Because if you change it, then you could have 100% apartments. No matter what we think here, you could still have 100% apartments based on what I've heard.
It works there. Why can't it work here?
What I've heard, and good comments from everybody here, is that we need to be flexible. I've been in big cities where the third floor is an Ace Hardware, and the fourth floor is all apartments. We can't be so unflexible that maybe one unit has got an apartment downstairs, and the next unit, the whole downstairs is commercial. In other words, we just got to be open-minded to see what the total mix is, because there's a million different ways to do that. But I hear you all saying it should be basically commercial with a mixture of residential. And that's what the DDA's been trying to do for a long time. So we can't get any builder to come on, well, they might do it. And that's just a selling job we've got to do. But so at this point, now, did you want anything else you want us to do?
No, that was really great input to hear your positions, and I think it will help us start to craft and go into the next work session for more discussion.
Do we have a consensus to move to another work session?
Yep.
Yes.
Everybody okay with that? We have a consensus. Okay?
That's not doable in 2 weeks.
4 weeks.
4 weeks.
Sorry, we have vacations.
Get your cards and letters coming in. Meet with the staff. Give us information. And thank you. I had a deadline. I hope we were going to get done by 9 o'clock. This was a Bronco game tonight. We have a real problem. Anyway.
Do you need a motion to adjourn?
I need a motion. Well, we have reports.
Oh.
Do you have reports? Okay, we don't have reports. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, you were looking at 9, and I wanted you to beat the clock.